My name is Alina. I am 34 years old, and I live in a small town called Ridgeville, not far from the mountains. I work as a receptionist at a dental clinic, and most days are quiet. People come in with toothaches and leave with numb smiles. But I have carried a pain that no medicine could touch and no smile could hide. It lived in my chest like a locked room, dark and quiet, but always there. The morning it all changed. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at my shoes. I should have been getting ready for work, but I could not move. My hands were shaking slightly, and my mouth was dry. Outside the window, the street was wet with rain, and the sky looked like it had not slept either. I felt numb, but under that numbness, there was something heavy pressing on my chest. It was the same weight I had been carrying for months. I had not felt like myself in a long time. Life had been one long stretch of silence and disappointment. My mother passed away 2 years ago, and her loss never healed inside me. After she died, my father moved away to live with his sister, and we barely spoke anymore. My younger brother drifted off, caught up in his own world. And the man I had planned to marry, he left when I needed him the most. He said I had changed, that I wasn't who I used to be. I suppose he was right. Grief changes people, even when they try to stay the same. At first, I tried to keep busy. I volunteered at church, helped neighbors, smiled at work, and told people I was doing better. But inside, I was slowly falling apart. I kept asking questions that no one could answer. Why did everything break at once? Why did the people I trusted leave me behind? And most of all, why did God stay silent when I begged for help? I prayed every night, even when I didn't believe my own words anymore. I stared at the ceiling in the dark and whispered into the silence, hoping for a sign. Something. Anything. But no answer came. I started to wonder if God had forgotten me, if maybe I had done something wrong, if I was being punished for a mistake I didn't even remember making. The silence grew heavier each week. It felt like walking through fog that never cleared. At work, I smiled and asked people how their weekends were, but I never shared my own. I stopped returning phone calls. I stopped looking in the mirror. I even stopped visiting my church. It felt too painful to sit in that quiet building and pretend I believed someone was listening. One evening, after another long, quiet day at the clinic, I sat on the bus home and looked around at the tired faces. Everyone was scrolling on their phones or staring into the distance. No one looked happy. No one looked like they were being heard either. I realized then that maybe I was not the only one who felt forgotten. That night, I did something different. Instead of praying in bed, I sat on the floor near the window, wrapped in a blanket. I didn't say any words. I didn't ask for anything. I just sat there and let the quiet fill the room. It was the first time I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped fighting the silence. I just let myself feel it. And something small happened. Not a voice, not a sign, but a small feeling. It was almost like my body had been holding its breath for months. And now, finally, it could exhale. I cried that night. Not loud, not wild. Just soft tears that rolled down and soaked my sleeves. I cried because I was tired. I cried because I missed my mother. I cried because I wanted someone, anyone, even God, to tell me I was going to be okay. Over the next few weeks, I stopped pretending as much. I started writing in a small notebook each night. Not full sentences, just thoughts. Pieces of sadness, fragments of hope. I didn't show them to anyone, but writing them helped. It was like leaving little messages for myself in the dark. One morning, while walking to the bus stop, I saw an older woman drop her groceries on the sidewalk. I helped her gather them, and she smiled at me with tired eyes. She said, "You remind me of my daughter. She died last year." I didn't know what to say, but I stayed with her until she found a taxi. That moment stayed with me. I realized I was not the only one carrying invisible grief. The world was full of it. Maybe that's why the silence felt so big. Not because God had left, but because we all carried so much pain, it was hard to hear anything else. Slowly, something began to shift inside me. I didn't suddenly feel better. I didn't find answers. But I started walking through my days with a little more strength. I made coffee in the mornings again. I opened the curtains. I called my father just to say hello. Small steps. But they mattered. And then, one rainy evening, I walked past a small chapel near the edge of town. I used to walk by it every day, but this time, something made me stop. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. It was empty. The lights were soft. The smell of old wood and candle wax filled the air. I sat down in the back row and let the silence wrap around me. I didn't pray. I didn't ask for a miracle. I just sat there, eyes closed, breathing. And in that moment, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt like I was being held, not by hands, not by words, just by presence, by something quiet and still and strong. That night, when I walked home, the rain had stopped. The streets were wet, but the sky was clearing. I looked up and saw a single star between the clouds. It wasn't bright. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. And that was enough. I am still learning to trust again. I still have days when the silence comes back, when I wonder if I'm doing enough, or if I'm still waiting for something that will never come. But now, I know that silence doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means something deeper is growing, slowly, quietly, under the surface. And maybe, just maybe, God never left at all. Before I share the rest of my story, could you please tell me where you're from? It gives me strength to know there's someone out there who listens to me, who understands me. It means a lot to me. The weeks after I visited that little chapel were not magical. My life did not suddenly change, and I didn't receive any signs or answers. But I started noticing small things, gentle things, things I used to ignore. When I stepped off the bus one morning, I noticed how the leaves had turned gold and orange. Autumn had arrived quietly, but beautifully. I felt the chill in the air, and for the first time in a long while, I welcomed it. My notebook became my friend. I started writing more each night. Not just thoughts, but memories too. I wrote about my mother's laugh, the way she used to hum while cooking dinner, and how she always kept a small bottle of perfume in her bag. I wrote about the first time I fell in love, and how that love had faded but still taught me something. Writing gave me peace. It helped me see that my life was not empty. It was full of moments, both joyful and painful. And every one of them made me who I was. At work, I began to speak more kindly to myself. I still felt tired, and some days were harder than others, but I no longer pushed myself to be perfect. I allowed myself to be human. When I made a mistake, I corrected it and moved on. I didn't cry in the bathroom anymore. I didn't fake a smile just to get through the day. My smile became smaller, but more real. One afternoon, a woman came into the clinic with her teenage daughter. The girl looked nervous, holding her face and blinking away tears. As I checked them in, the mother looked at me and said, "She's afraid it's going to hurt." I smiled gently and said to the girl, "I understand. It's okay to be afraid, but we'll take care of you." She gave me a tiny nod, and I saw something change in her eyes. Just a small spark of comfort. That moment stayed with me. When I got home that evening, I thought about all the people who passed through my life each day. Most of them I would never see again. But maybe, just maybe, I could give something small to each of them. A kind word, a warm look, a feeling that they were seen, because I knew how much it hurt to feel invisible. That night, I remembered something my mother used to say when life felt hard. She would hold my hand and say, "Alina, even when you don't see the sun, it's still there behind the clouds." I never forgot those words, but I hadn't thought about them in years. Now they came back like a soft wind. And I realized something. Maybe faith isn't about knowing. Maybe it's just about holding on through the dark, trusting that the light will return even when you can't feel it yet. A few days later, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. It was from my father. He had written me a letter. Inside, he said he was sorry for the distance between us. He missed me. He wanted to talk again, maybe even visit soon. I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Not the kind of crying that comes from pain, but the kind that feels like rain after a long, dry season. The next Sunday, I walked back to the chapel. This time, there were a few other people there. I sat in the same spot as before and listened quietly. The pastor spoke about seasons, how everything in life changes. Nothing stays forever, not joy, and not pain. He said the waiting season is not wasted time. It is growing time. His words felt like they were meant just for me. After the service, I stepped outside and felt the sun on my face. I stood there for a while, eyes closed, breathing in the fresh air. Then someone tapped my shoulder. It was the older woman I had helped with groceries weeks ago. She smiled and said, "I'm glad to see you here. I've been praying for you." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her. Sometimes words are not needed. Later that evening, I called my father. We spoke for almost an hour. He told me about his garden, about the birds he watches from his window. He asked about my job, my health, my life. We laughed a little. We also cried. I told him I missed him. He said he never stopped thinking about me. After the call ended, I sat quietly with my phone in my hand. It felt like a door had opened, one I thought was closed forever. The following week, something unexpected happened at work. The clinic manager, a kind but quiet woman named Teresa, asked to speak with me. She said she had noticed my patience with clients, especially nervous ones, and how I always kept calm under pressure. Then she told me they were planning to create a new position, one that involved more communication and support for new patients, especially children and the elderly. She asked if I would be interested. My heart skipped. I said yes. That evening, I walked home with a lightness I had not felt in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving forward. Not quickly, not perfectly, but forward. I sat at my desk that night, opened my notebook, and wrote one line. Maybe I was never forgotten. Maybe I was just being prepared. As I turned off the light and lay down in bed, I thought about everything I had been through. The silence, the sadness, the feeling of being left behind. And now, these small steps forward, these quiet signs of hope. I knew there would still be hard days. That is life. But I also knew I was no longer the same person who sat on the edge of her bed, unable to move. That version of me had been holding on by a thread. But now I was learning how to stand. Before I fell asleep, I whispered into the darkness one last time. I didn't ask for anything. I simply said, "Thank you for not leaving me, even when I thought you did." And this time, I didn't hear silence. I heard peace. 3 months had passed since I received that letter from my father. The air had grown colder, and winter had started to paint its silver breath across Ridgeville. The trees now stood bare, and the mornings were often covered in fog. But inside me, something had begun to grow again. It wasn't joy, not yet. But it was something steadier, a kind of calm that had taken root in the soil of my heart. Every morning, I still took the same walk to the bus stop. I passed the same baker putting bread in his window. I passed the same woman who walked her dog with her bright pink hat. These small scenes, once invisible to me, now felt like threads connecting me to life again. I started saying good morning to people. Some responded, some didn't. But I did it anyway. It made me feel more alive. The new position at work began 2 weeks later. I was now helping patients prepare for their visits. especially those who were anxious. I would talk to them before their appointments, explain what would happen, and just sit with them if they needed comfort. I found that I was good at it. Not because I had special training, but because I understood fear. I knew what it felt like to sit in silence, hoping someone would notice your pain. One day, a young boy came in with his grandmother. He was about 7 and looked like he hadn't slept in days. His small hands gripped the edge of the chair tightly. I sat next to him and asked about his favorite animal. At first, he didn't answer, but then he whispered, "Tigers." I smiled and said, "That's a strong choice. You must be brave like a tiger, too." His eyes met mine for a second, and then he gave me a small nod. After the appointment, his grandmother thanked me. She said, "No one's ever taken the time to talk to him like that." I walked home that day feeling like I had given something meaningful, even if it was small. That night, I lit a candle in my room. It had been my mother's favorite scent, vanilla and cinnamon. The flame danced gently, and I watched it for a long time. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who had felt abandoned, the one who had cried in the dark. I didn't hate her. In fact, I felt proud of her. She had survived. She had kept breathing when it felt like the world had stopped. She had kept believing in something, even when she wasn't sure what. One evening, I received another letter from my father. This time, he asked if he could visit me for a weekend. My hands trembled as I read his words. It had been over a year since we'd seen each other in person. I agreed. We made plans for the second week of December. When he arrived, he looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were still kind. We hugged at the train station, and I held on to him for a little longer than expected. We didn't talk much at first. We walked to my apartment and sat with cups of tea in our hands. The silence between us wasn't heavy like it used to be. It was soft. Like two people who didn't need to speak everything out loud. Later that night, we went for a walk through town. The holiday lights were already up, and the streets glowed with gentle gold. My father told me stories I hadn't heard before, about his youth, about how he met my mother, about his regrets. I listened, really listened, and when it was my turn, I told him the truth, about how lost I had felt, about the nights I thought God had stopped listening, about how I found peace in silence. He didn't interrupt me. He just looked at me and said, "I felt the same way after your mother passed. I didn't know how to handle the silence, so I ran from it. I should have stayed." I reached for his hand and held it. We didn't need to say more. The weekend passed quickly. When he left, we promised to call more, to write more, to not let the silence win again. As the train pulled away, I stood on the platform feeling a strange mix of sadness and hope. But most of all, I felt connected. After that visit, something changed in how I carried myself. I started thinking differently, not just about God or pain or silence, but about the future. I began dreaming again. Nothing big, just soft dreams. Maybe taking a short trip. Maybe starting a small blog where I could share pieces of my story. Maybe even going back to church more regularly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. One night, as I walked past the chapel, I saw the lights on and heard soft music inside. I pushed the door open and saw a small group of people lighting candles. It was a quiet gathering for those who had lost loved ones. I didn't know anyone there, but I sat down in the last row. Each person stood up and shared one thing about the person they missed. When it was my turn, I stood slowly and said, "My mother loved sunsets and vanilla candles, and she always told me, even when I don't see the sun, it's still there." I sat down, and someone behind me gently touched my shoulder. As winter deepened, I began to feel something I had not felt in a long time. Warmth. Not from outside, but from within. The kind of warmth that comes when you stop running from yourself, when you sit with your pain long enough to understand it, when you stop asking why and start accepting what is. One snowy morning, I walked past a bookstore and saw a journal in the window. It had gold edges and a simple cover that read, "Begin Again." I smiled and walked inside to buy it. That evening, I opened to the first page and wrote, "This is not the and this is the beginning I never expected." I think about that phrase often now. Life doesn't always give us clear answers. Sometimes the silence stretches longer than we think we can handle. Sometimes people leave and don't return. Sometimes the prayers feel like they disappear into the sky. But maybe the point isn't to get answers. Maybe the point is to learn how to walk without them. Now, when I think about God, I don't picture a voice booming from the clouds. I think of soft moments. A smile from a stranger. A letter from someone you thought had forgotten you. A warm candle on a cold night. A quiet peace that enters your heart and asks for nothing but trust. I still have questions. I still have days when I feel small and unsure. But now I know that being forgotten is not the same as being alone. I was never truly alone. I just needed time to hear the gentle voice that doesn't speak in thunder, but in stillness. As I walk through this new season of my life, I carry my pain like a scar, not an open wound. It reminds me where I've been, but it doesn't stop me from moving forward. I carry my faith like a light, small but steady, and I carry my hope like a seed, knowing that it may grow slowly, but it will grow. To anyone who feels forgotten, I hope you know this. The silence is not the end. The stillness is not empty. And even if it takes time, healing does come. Not always in the way we expect, but in the way we need. And sometimes, when we stop trying to hear answers, we begin to hear something even better. A whisper in the soul that says, "You're not alone. You never were." I hope you have enjoyed the story. Like and comment if you want to hear more soon.